about more than strength. So welcome to More Than Strength. I'm Dan Flanick, and today I have someone who I've known now for, probably about maybe 4 or 5 years. He actually was my college instructor for CPR and first aid. His name's Steve Richert, and he's a really, really interesting guy, which you're going to discover in the next 30 minutes or so. And let me just share this. My CPR class was a combination of, yes, CPR, but also philosophy. So I got the best of both worlds from Steve. And since that time, we've just kind of been keeping in contact. I don't know, the universe just kind of keeps putting us, in contact with each other. So thanks for coming on the show, Steve.
Yeah, thanks for having me. There's a handful of students that we met at a community college in upstate New York, and the realm of community college is very interesting because you get some people who are above their pay grade and they're not really able to handle what's going on there, and then you have other people that are who could be playing in the big leagues, but that are just kind of in AAA for a little while they get their act together. And so there are a lot of students that I've kind of kept up with a little bit, and some have done kind of continued on a downward course. And then there are some that have just really hit an inflection point, found their stride, and just done some really great things, and have made me very proud to have known them, and you're certainly one of them, to see people kind of forging their own path and serving society and the community in the ways that they can. And so I'm excited to be part of this, and glad to see it developing for you. This is awesome.
Yeah, it really is a roller coaster, and I really appreciate you saying that. And it actually is a perfect segue into I just want to get right into it. Me and you never have really small talk or anything like that.
No.
So you just mentioned it, forging your own way, creating your own path. This is something that you and I have discussed multiple times. And you live a very unique life. And I wouldn't say you've overcome the fear of, I don't know if the word nomadic is the way to describe your life, but very interesting in the sense that you're not someone who just falls into the status quo. And I'd really like for you to describe what it is that you do and what your lifestyle is like.
Oh, that's like the hardest question for me to answer. This could take the entirety of the interview will be one answer. Because when I meet people in the airport, I guess the simplest, let me start by saying my wife is a flight attendant. And I like to start from that point because she has like a normal-ish job. Like it's fairly involved and exotic because she flies around all over the place. But it's something that people can say, okay, yeah, I understand what that is. But because of the fact that she's a flight attendant, I spend a lot of time flying and traveling. And so when I meet people in airports, it's always this ethical question that I have to wrestle with. Do I tell people what I actually do, which will undoubtedly take the entirety of the flight and bore them, possibly help them sleep, but maybe irritate them, or do I just kind of say, oh, I run a website? So the short answer is I'm a content creator and I create media, adventure media. That's the short answer. The longer answer is that since I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in 1999, in the winter of 1999, I was 16 years old at the time. And the one thing that I took away from my diagnosis experience was this concept of dependence and not having freedom to live the life that you want, but having a predetermined pathway that was already set out for you based on the fact that you have this diagnosis. That was what they kind of impressed upon me at the hospital under, best of intentions. But when I heard that as a teen, I know a lot of teens, especially those that live with chronic illness, their first reaction is to say, you can't tell me what to do. I'm going to pretend that I don't have this condition. For me, I said, I'm going to prove you wrong by going the opposite direction and micromanaging this condition to the point where I crush its impact in my life and turn it into something that fuels the freedom that I want to have. And to me, the highest expression of freedom, and again, this is a personal and largely a creative perspective, is climbing and being in the mountains. And I was diagnosed right around the time that I got into climbing, that I was first exposed to it. And it was the fact that I was so terrified by the experience of climbing, and that terror overshadowed any difficulty that I was having in learning how to inject insulin and dealing with like highs and lows of my blood sugar, and the fact that I had almost died only a couple weeks before, because my diagnosis was really, really rough, because I was undiagnosed for a long time. And, in a bad way, I was in the ICU for a while, lost a couple of days, don't even remember any of that stuff, got rushed to ambulance, the hospital, the whole 9 yards. But climbing was scarier. And I was like, wait a minute, there are bigger things than diabetes. And I have this opportunity to redefine my life according to the terms that I want to live it on. And I don't know how. And so there was nothing for me to look at, no blueprint, no resource, no guide. So it forced me into a creative lifestyle from the very beginning at 16, where I had to say, all right, I want to go climbing. Well, how do I do that? I want to learn how to live my life. I want to do all these things. And so to make a long story excruciating, I went to college actually for philosophy and English, because I like to write and I like to think and I like to write about what I was thinking. And I figured I want to get good grades in college, so I'm going to follow this pathway out, and then somebody is going to come along and scoop me up, because I'm going to have a good grade to show for something in my collegiate career. Long story, even more excruciating, the philosophy companies were not hiring when I got out of school. And so I just would work odd jobs in order to facilitate my travel for 6 months out of the year. Then I would come back and I would do more work, pay off my credit cards. And this is something, it was very independent, very free. Like now I think they call it like a ski bum or a climbing bum, dirtbag. There's a lot of pejorative terms that relate to it, all of which,
Steve the dirtbag.
yeah, the dirtbag, that was my lifestyle. And I thought that was perfectly normal. And of course, what better fit than teaching at a community college, because you have good long breaks off. The work is, you're working with people who want to be there. For somebody that likes to speak, as you can tell, I am, fit that role. And it was, people who were close to my age, who wanted to be there, wanted to learn and incorporate some of the philosophy into what I was doing. And along that pathway, the next progression was kind of going from teaching in the system to saying, I don't want to go back to school, get a master's degree, incur more debt, something that I think everybody in our age group has struggled with or is still struggling with. And I said, rather than going into the system and looking for security, I want to take the next step and turn what I've done, like the dirt bagging, but try to direct that in a context that is educational, but on my own terms through my own platform. And I decided to start with type 1 diabetes, making a ruckus in that space and saying, here's a different take on it, like changing the story of diabetes through adventure. And I started a website, started off as a blog, and, kind of went down the road, made a documentary, did some climbing projects where, trying to spread that word. And really everything since then has been based on trying to find freedom. And so most recently, I'm 34 now, have a 2-year-old daughter, and about a year ago decided to I had taken a job in a cubicle, doing good work for a good company, but it wasn't feeding my soul, so to speak. And I wanted to get back out on the road and start really doing climbing and diabetes advocacy again. And my wife and I sold everything again, and got a little 13-foot trailer, moved, did that, kind of lived on the road for a little under a year. And then very recently just kind of washed up, and we're back to square one, because, that lifestyle is a lot harder to do now with a 2-year-old.
I'm sure.
And yeah, so ultimately everything for me comes down to finding freedom and self-determination. And like climbing is one place that I found that, but I've also found that a lot in photography and communication with people. And it's, yeah.
So there's the I feel like you did a pretty dang good job of condensing that story down for how long it actually could have been.
That's true.
So,
Yeah, I've gone much longer when I've had the opportunity, certainly.
yeah. So I really want to talk about, your living vertical project or your business, what you do and how, to me, it's just fascinating. Like we talk about strength and strength training, and a lot of times with people on here, like your buddy Rodney last week, we talked with him about that. And coming from somebody who trains like with heavy weights, climbing mountains is just a whole new feat of strength that I've personally never embarked on, which now, if you're in New York, I'm up not that far away, so maybe I can come
Yeah.
down and join you. But I'd like to hear how climbing mountains, because you, like most everybody in life climbs their own mountain, but
Yes.
you literally climb your own mountains, like both figuratively and literally. So how do you think the literal act of climbing mountains has manifested itself in your mindset toward life? Because I know, like you said, you wanted to prove, like, look, you want to prove what you could do, even though in spite of having type 1 diabetes, rather than following the status quo of having a disease like that. And same thing in terms of like you want to prove what you can do with living vertical and what you're doing in your business life, rather than falling into the status quo of the 9 to 5, which there's nothing wrong with if you find something you really enjoy in that. But it's a
Yes.
difficult path to not fall into the status quo. So how is climbing mountains or the mental benefits you get from and perspective from climbing mountains manifested itself into other aspects of life?
That's a terrific question. One of my favorite ones to talk about because to me, it's very common for people to interact with the physical manifestation of a thing because of the fact that it's, the most obvious and tangible, right? And as from a philosophy background, I've always looked at things to say, okay, so this is the part that I can see and touch. What is the part that is non-physical or metaphysical? And climbing is not so much something, at least for me, and it varies from person to person because I fully believe that anything you do is creative if you look at it as such, even if it's lifting weights, training. Um, Everything has a creative component to it where you say, instead of following not to say that you throw rules and caution to the wind, but where you accept some responsibility for what this is going to mean and the significance you attach to it. That's a creative responsibility as much as painting a picture or taking a picture or writing a book. And I think that's one of the things with climbing that has drawn me to it, because it's less of this is something I do because I want to be strong, but more of a way to say this is something that I do because it gives me an opportunity to wrestle with things, to work things out, and to express who I already am. Because in climbing, we see pictures and we fixate on the summits and we fixate on getting to the top, and that's what you think of. But the hardest part is keeping it together and getting back down, because the summit is optional, the descent is mandatory, and most people don't think about it like that. And so really it's a process that is full of failure. And I like to think that it's beneficial to engage in a process that is rife with failure, where we're forced to confront that and just get over it and accept the fact that if you try something, it might not work. That's totally okay. And the more you can become immune to that fear of failure, the more you can grow, because it's only just like the little bit that I know about, I think hypertrophy, is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Hypertrophy.
However
Like,
you want to say it.
yeah, one of those tomato, right? Like a lot of growth from a physical standpoint comes from pushing yourself to that point where, you're failing, where you have to encounter that failure. And so many people only get so far because they only do as much as they can do while still looking cool or being under control, rather than saying, what can I do that's going to be out of my comfort zone, even if it means I can bench 400 pounds, but I can't touch my knees. So I'm going to do ballet or I'm going to do yoga, because that is what's going to give me longevity and mobility. And so all this is a roundabout answer to say that climbing is something that it does contain obvious physical strength, but even more so, I think the more important benefit is the mental strength and the outlook that you have to have in terms of, number one, risk management, and then compartmentalizing and analyzing failure appropriately without attaching the negativity to that failure, but just disconnecting yourself from it. And that's something that's useful in every area of your life, because risk and failure are the things that shut everybody down, whether it's like asking, a girl for a number in a bar, or whether it's, trying for a job, or asking for a raise, or starting to lift weights because you feel like you should and you've never gotten off the couch and you're still watching Netflix and don't know what to do about that fact. And that's the, and it's ironic that for me, climbing is connected with diabetes so much, because diabetes is a condition that people, that the general public has a great deal of misinformation about, misunderstanding. There's a lot of shame and stereotypes associated with it. And there's also, from a medical standpoint, people look at it as a physical condition, but the physical component, learning how to manage the physical component, is very, very small relative to managing the mental component, which is very large. And climbing is something that really, you can be as strong as you like. And I think that's the thing that I really like about climbing, or that speaks to me about it, is that physical strength will only get you so far. Like, you can be as strong as you like. I used to climb with a couple of kids in the gym. They were gym climbers, and they were young kids. They were little gym monkeys, and they were so strong. I mean, they had these tiny little hands. They could grab on these little holds and like pinch the living daylights out of anything and hold on to nothing. But they were so scared of going outside and putting it on real rock that I was older and heavier and like slower and like way disadvantaged, but I could do way more stuff because I just wasn't scared of it. And you cannot get beyond the mental component when it comes to climbing. And I like that puzzle piece.
Do you think, just talking about fear, and it's actually something that I read what you write as much as I can, and something you write about a lot is fear. Do you think, do you see, because I mean, you got to teach the millennials. so did I lose you?
Yeah, just for a second.
So you get to you had experience teaching the millennial generation. Do you feel like that there's a lot of fear amongst that generation, like our generation, in terms of, we're drawing a lot of metaphors here, but
totally.
Climbing the mountains that maybe people see and they really like to climb, but they shy away from because of that fear? Did you see a lot of that?
I feel, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was one of the things that I tried to, in the short, I think maybe 3 or 4 years that I was in the education system, I feel like being completely honest, and hopefully my, Sheila isn't listening to this, my former supervisor, although I think she'd give me a pass on it at this point. The CPR is something that, you can teach people that who are fairly adept. You can teach them that in a weekend easily. That's how I took all my certifications, recertifications, etc. And I really tried to leave information that would be useful beyond the strict technical aspect. And I think what we're lacking today is a willingness to solve problems, because I think a lot of it goes back to fear of failure. There's many levels we could come at this from, but like from a professional standpoint, nobody wants to be in charge of solving a problem because it's a problem, and they don't, people only want to do things that they know they can do. Nobody wants to tackle something, but yet that's the opportunity when you go into a space that's underserved, when you go into a place that is run down, and you find a way to do it better and you add value there. And I think that is something that our generation struggles with a lot, largely because we grew up with this idea that if you just go to school and follow directions and listen and do what you're told, and you go through the system, you go in at K whatever, and you come out at grade whatever, or university level of whatever, and somebody will pick you up and bring you into the fold and give you money and make you comfortable and secure for doing something that helps give some entity some value. And as long as you can, the 1.35 kids and the white picket fence and all that. And I kind of saw when I was in college, I realized when I was looking at a lot of the people, and the light went on for me where I was like, wait a minute, these guys all put their pants on the same way that I do. And I'm paying a whole lot of money to listen to these guys. And it was way before the whole self-education thing came about. And at this point, I'm a photographer. I make videos. I don't call myself a filmmaker because I do more like YouTube style, kind of quick and dirty video editing that 80% of the value, but with only 20% of the work type of thing. But I've taught myself to do just about everything, because when you get into a market, like, when you're doing stuff online, you have to wear all those different hats. And generationally, I think we are afraid of that because we want security. We want to say, I know that there is this outcome on the other side of it, instead of saying, here's an interesting problem. If I try to solve it, I may fail, but I'm going to learn a bunch of stuff that's going to increase my value and is going to increase my usefulness ultimately. And instead of thinking of things in terms of hiring and jobs and systems, being able to think about ourselves as individuals and say, how can I be more useful? What is it that the world needs? How can I do that? And getting outside that box is hard, because the pathway is just the pathway is not functional, but it's still intact. So that model hasn't been broken down where people are like, you know what, like I may get a bunch of torches and pitchforks coming at me for this, but personally, I think the education system, it's broken. The whole model of going to grade school, it's a vestigial tale that is left over from the industrial era, that when, if you research this, it's all about creating compliant workers, people who will do what they're told, who are submissive and not thinking outside the box. And that's why you can have a bunch of college educated people and you can put them in a room with a simple problem to solve, and nobody will take action, nobody will try anything, nobody will do anything, because of the fact that everybody is conditioned to wait for somebody to tell them what to do, instead of saying, you know what, let's cowboy up and take a risk. And I think our generation is starting to understand that that's a need.
Yeah. I feel like it kind of goes like when you're young, it's the opposite of that. Like, you're not taught to comply yet. Yeah. You're learning, typical young discipline kind of things like that. But like, parents ask you, what do you want to be when you grow older? I want to be an astronaut, or whatever it is that kid wants to be. And everyone's like, yeah, go for that. But the older you get, the less
closer,
that people, the less people support that kind of thing.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
And I also think that just society as a whole is I think too often they're focused on, and I'm guilty of this, we all are, on what's next rather than what's right now. And to tie it into climbing a little bit, it's the same thing with school. Like, the school system is, you go to kindergarten. Well, I don't know if you're looking forward to first grade. I don't even remember what I was thinking in kindergarten. I think I was picking my nose. But first grade, the next thing, second. Once you're done with fifth grade, okay, middle school now. Once middle school is done, high school. And it's always what's next, what's next, what's next. And I think that aids fear in preventing people from doing maybe things that they really want to do. Because if you're scared of the future because you might not know what's next, does that make sense? So if there is no certain what's next, it makes it scary, and people want to latch onto, well, what's next is I might get shot for this, but the accounting job or whatever it is. Not that that's a horrible thing. If you like numbers, go for it. I'm not trying to shit on people for that kind of thing, but you know what I mean? Like, rather than that person, the person who settles for this thing, even though they really in their heart want to be doing that thing. I think that this,
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, this idea that there is an expectation of a specific progression is part of what's broken, because you take X amount of people and you put them through that system, and some people are going ahead, some people are going behind, there's other people that are off to the side, and it's not meeting the needs of where people are, and it's not as individuals in that educational system, and it's also not meeting the needs of society as a whole, because that's why we have all these people living in their parents' basements, because there's, you know, the whole system is still, it's in that flux, it's in that transition where we haven't fully detached from the old ways of training people into the new way of service. And that's really what everything comes down to, is serving people. As much as, you know, this little segment of our conversation sounds like a, you know, post-industrial anti-capitalist rant, the truth is that there needs to be, like, I have gone through phases where I want to be out on the road living my life. And there are also times when I want the convenience and the comfort of a steady job. And like you said, it's not to shit on people that have a different view. It's just to say that there's an opportunity out there, that it's a tragedy if somebody, it's like the Hemingway quote. I mentioned this on my podcast, a podcast called The Adventure RX, which, you know, Adventure RX, like prescription, kind of little play on words there. And I mentioned this in the episode I just released about how Hemingway, I think, had the quote about, you know, you're not going to remember the hours you spent mowing the lawn or doing your taxes, like go climb the mountain, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, for somebody who is happily engaged in mowing their lawn, no one should come along and tell them, hey, go climb that mountain because you ought to. It's for the person that's mowing their lawn, staring at that mountain saying, man, I would, but I don't know if I'm good enough. Maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. That's the person who should go do that because of the fact they want to. And conversely, when you've been off climbing that mountain and you're like, you know, I'd like to go back and mow my lawn. Don't climb the mountain anymore. Go back and mow your lawn. It's cool. You know, but you got to be honest with yourself. And that's such a big part of climbing, is being honest with yourself, because fear and gravity are very real factors in everything that you're doing. And you cannot lie to yourself, and like whatever lies you tell yourself, they immediately dissipate, which is one of the reasons why bringing a girlfriend or a girl that you're, or a person of the opposite gender that you're, or I guess that's not even, like, I don't know, whoever you're trying to get romantically involved is, you know, that's a terrible partner to have as a climber when you're first starting out interacting with that person, because all of the things that we typically, you know, try to put our best foot forward, you know, all of that facade just right out the window. Like when you start encountering the fear and the objective risk that comes along with that, it's the truth. You know, it forces you to confront the truth.
Yeah, I think back to your point about that person on mowing their lawn and looking at that mountain, I don't even think, like, a lot of times I don't even think it's that person's fault. Like if they have this mountain that they're you know, they're too scared to leave their lawn to go climb. I think, like, kind of back to the school thing, I just wish that, like, if I were, like, when I was going back to school, and like if a teacher got up there and said, hey, like, yeah, I'm going to teach you this stuff, but listen, like, if you don't have to go this route, you don't have to do this. Like, luckily I had parents who kind of told me that. And then honestly, talking with you, especially like getting to know you in my coming in, growing into a man, it's, you know, you're someone who's helped me kind of reform that image of what life is really about. And you kind of hit on it a little bit before, but it's to me, it comes down to just certain options that you have. And we have, hopefully, on average, about 80 years on earth. Like, I think it's, for guys, it's like 76 on average, and women it's 78. So in the span of time that we have, that's nothing.
Yeah.
So the whole point of us talking about this, and however this conversation got here, what I want people who are listening to this is to get out of it, is that you only have so much time, and it's precious. It's so much more precious. We take it for granted so much.
Yeah.
So if you have something that, it doesn't have to be a whole career change and you want to go literally become an astronaut, but if there's something that you're just itching to do, maybe it's just start a little business or paint more or hike more or whatever it is, like you only have a certain amount of time here. So that's what we're trying to say with this part of the conversation. Not, hey, if you went to school to become an accountant, you suck. That's not what we're saying. We're just
I desperately need the services of accountants.
oh
I
yeah.
do math on my fingers. I can write like nobody's business, but I cannot do math. So I have a great deal of respect for people who are
Exactly.
in that profession.
So, so kind of back to climbing. I knew this was going to go crazy. This conversation always does, but it's awesome anyway. So you recently wrote a book, right?
Yes.
You just released it not too long ago, a couple months ago. What are you talking about in that book? Like what?
So the book that I wrote, it's titled 5 Minutes of Chaos That Changed My Life. And it is about a climbing experience that I had this past summer. I was out in the Bugaboo mountain range, which is in central Canada, eastern British Columbia. And I was climbing with a partner who also lives with type 1 diabetes named Martin. And the two of us have climbed together a bunch. And to this particular climb that we were doing, it was very demanding, more so from a sustained longevity perspective. It is a very long route and a very difficult one to retreat from. And so the headspace going into that was much different than sort of a climbing gym where, you get tired, you just lower down to the ground. Well, this is, 1,500 feet up. And in order to get down, you have to go over the top and then down the other side. And it's very high and exposed to lightning. And there are a whole bunch of hazards that come with climbing that really don't have anything to do with falling in and of itself, but that are more related to just the environmental hazards of being exposed to the weather and the conditions. And when you're up on top and when you can't just come back down, you're kind of stranded, you're marooned up there, you're helpless. And, being up there as two people that have a chronic medical issue that can present problems, that's a big part of the risk management. And so during the time that we were up there, the book really centers around an interval during the time we were up there where we wound up getting stuck up there. Benighted is the term they call it in climbing, which sounds very gallant and regal, like, some sort of a royal knighting ceremony. But really it means that the sun goes down and you're still up on top of the mountain. And it's not a whole lot of fun. And to be fair, this is not one of the most difficult routes it's not something that would get a write-up in National Geographic. It's a fairly pedestrian route, but it is very long. And the way it stacked up at the beginning of the day, my diabetes kind of acted up. And so I had to stop and eat some food. And it was right at the beginning of the day when a handful of other groups passed us. And then everything bottlenecked on the route where we got stuck behind these groups now. And so we wound up kind of getting right to the top of where we would have to start descending right when the sun went down. And in the mountains, the sun doesn't kind of gradually go down. It's lights out because the horizon is so much lower. And the option that we wound up having was, okay, do we spend the night out here on the top of the highest summit in the mountain range, which is a lightning rod for all intents and purposes? The weather was clear at the moment, but do we spend the night up here, find a place to kind of hunker down and have what we call in climbing a shiver bivvy and just kind of cuddle for the night and get down at first light? Or do we try to descend in the darkness? Now, most people, like I said earlier, think of climbing as being the summit experience. And the reality is the summit is, in most cases, is purely optional. The descent is mandatory. In this case, the summit was mandatory and the descent is mandatory because you have to go over the summit to then get to the descent route on the other side. And we knew this all going in, but the descent is statistically by a long, long margin where all accidents happen in climbing, because at the beginning of the day, you're on point, mental clarity, energy, all that stuff. You're double checking everything. At the end of the day, you just want to get down and sleep in the tent and not be stuck on the side of the mountain or what have you. And you also have that elation of feeling like, oh, we made it because we got to the summit. And so there's a part of you that wants to let your guard down. So we had to make the decision. Do we go down? Do we stay? And ultimately we made the decision to spend the night up there. And during that period, I won't give all the details about it. If folks are interested in checking out that book, they can find it at livingvertical.org, which maybe you could put a link to in the show.
Yeah,
notes.
I'll put the link in the show notes on the website page.
Cool, thank you. And so it was in that time that we spent up there overnight where there was a chaotic 5-minute window where everything, like weather-wise and psychologically, like everything seemed like it was unraveling. And the moral of the story, is that I really realized the impact that the stories we tell ourselves are such a huge factor in shaping who we are and what we do and what we think is possible. And that's part of the reason why I do what I do through Living Vertical. And it's, I spend so much time creating content and putting this message out into the world that I rarely actually apply these same principles to myself. And the story of diabetes, I started Living Vertical because I wanted people to see diabetes as something that people who climb mountains have diabetes. That's the story that I want people to internalize for their own adaptation. And to me, I had set this limit that said, okay, I can climb this high and under these circumstances, which is still impressive enough to change the story for most people with diabetes who are not climbers. But for myself, I said, this is as far as I'm willing to go. And if I wind up in a situation where I'm stuck overnight on the side of a mountain, like that's something that I just that doesn't fit into my story. I can't handle this.
Mm-hmm.
And it was being forced and confronted with that situation where I had to handle it. It was like, I don't have a third option. I have to kind of go into survival mode here. And and this is purely a psychological thing, because at the end of the day, I would have survived if I had told myself a different story or not. I was at a place where this stuff happened and things went our way by a narrow margin. We made it. We were okay. But the experience of going through that is so different based on, having that realization that, hey, I always kind of set the bar down here at like a 6.5 for what I can do. And the reality is that that's a story that I tell myself. That 6.5 is a story. That's not the truth. The truth is really unknown. I don't know what that top number is. Maybe it's, maybe it's a little higher, maybe it's a lot higher, but the only way I'm ever going to find out is if I push.
Mm-hmm.
And even in the act of pushing and trying, you can still get complacent, which is what I did, where I kind of had, I was able to impress enough people with what I did to where I was like, I don't need to challenge myself because I'm just kind of, going through the motions. And I realized that it was like unlocking a whole new level and saying, man, I have way more stuff that I could be doing.
You leveled up.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go buy that book after we finish up this conversation. So you sold me on it. I think that's a good place to wrap up. We could probably do a lot more damage.
Totally.
This conversation keep going for a long period of time, but I think to keep people's attention, we should wrap it up right there. Do you have anything else you'd like to add? Where can people find you? You just said livingvertical.org. And then if they want to reach out to you personally, do you have anything that like Facebook or Twitter or anything?
Yeah, I'm active kind of all over Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube is my main kind of my main focus at this point, because I'm trying to, really focus my adventure media on video work. But livingvertical.org is the website, and we have all of our social accounts linked in there. You can contact me through there if people want to send me email. Steve at livingvertical.org or at livingvertical on Twitter, Instagram. Living Vertical is also on Facebook, all that good stuff. And I have a podcast, but again, you can find that either on iTunes or through. I'd love to discuss, because I think that a lot of what we talk about really applies to people who, in your population, who aren't necessarily stereotypical athletes or weightlifters or strength trainers, which is ironically my next project is climbing El Capitan in Yosemite, and I'm going to have to start weight training because I need to have better chops out there, and I got to get stronger, like deadlift, squat,
You knew where to find me.
I do. Yeah. I would definitely love to maybe do a follow-up and kind of pick your brain on some stuff, because it's been a long time since I've lifted weights. Everything has always been, with climbing, you want less body weight, but I got to kind of get stronger.
Stronger is always better.
Yeah.
But,
sure.
All right, Steve, thank you very much for taking time out of your day and coming on here. And I'm looking forward to releasing this. And please, if you guys have any stories similar to, what we're talking about now, even if you're just you consider yourself an average Joe, but you've used some form of strength, whether it's climbing mountains, lifting weights, to improve yourself both physically and mentally, please reach out to us at morethanstrength.com. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back next week.